When we think of police cars, we think of tough, strong, and dependable vehicles that can catch any criminal. These famous cars, like the Ford Crown Victoria and the Dodge Charger, were respected for both their power and their looks. But not every police car was as good as the badge said it was. Over the years, police forces in the US and around the world have tried out cars that were weak, strange, or even embarrassing. Some were too small to hold gear, some couldn't go faster, and a few were so ugly that even the police didn't want to be seen in them. These are the most forgettable, weird, and bad police cars ever. This list might change your mind if you think all police cars were strong and proud. The AMC Javelin from 1971 to 1972. Alabama needed to add more cars to its highway patrol fleet in the early 1970s. But they didn't have enough money to buy enough Ford or Chevrolet cars. That was when an unexpected candidate showed up. The AMC Javelin is a bold mid-size pony car that looks like a muscle car and competes with the Mustang. After testing the AMX version, which had 330 horsepower, AMC made a special police package just for police use. It had a 401 CIC V8 engine, a 3-speed automatic transmission from Borg-Warner, a low rear axle ratio for faster acceleration, and a rear spoiler that wasn't for aerodynamics but just to hold the big 401 badge. The Javelin became Alabama's first high-speed patrol car because it was much cheaper than its competitors, costing only about $3,000 US. But issues came up quickly. The sporty look meant a small cabin and a low roof line, which made it hard for many older officers to get in and out of the car. The small body also made it less safe in crashes with a lot of force. Even though the Javelin was powerful and looked great, it couldn't meet the needs of full-time police work. The contract wasn't renewed after 1972, and the Javelin is still a short but interesting part of American police car history from 1992 to 1994. Police car from Geo Metro. In the early 1990s, the Geo Metro was one of the cheapest cars on the US market. It cost less than $7,000, had a 3-cylinder 1.0 L engine, and weighed about 1,600 pounds. The Metro was made for people who are buying their first home and for busy city streets, but a few small towns in the US really do use the Geo Metro for police work. The goal was clear: keep your money. It was cheap to run, easy to drive in tight spaces, and got up to 45 miles per gallon. It makes sense until you have to chase someone who's running away. The Metro had only about 55 horsepower, so it took more than 13 seconds to go from 0 to 60 mph. It didn't have anti-lock brakes or airbags, and it didn't protect you from crashes at high speeds. The cabin was also way too small for an officer, equipment, and a detainee to be comfortable. Some towns tried it out, but most quickly gave up on the idea. The Geo Metro might have worked for college students, but it was sure to fail as a police car. 1979 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 CHP. The California Highway Patrol started testing a fleet of 12 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 units in 1979. They were looking for a smaller, faster, and more efficient alternative to the standard patrol sedans. The 350 CIN V8 engine in each Camaro had 170 horsepower and a 3-speed automatic transmission. They also had better tires, brakes, and suspension to meet police standards. The Camaro looked like a great match on paper. It looked tough, sped up quickly, and was small enough to be perfect for patrol work. But the results in the real world were terrible. 9 of the 12 units had engine problems within 18 months, mostly because the pistons broke. None of them lasted more than 26,000 miles without needing to be rebuilt. Ford quickly came out with the Fox body Mustang police version, which was lighter, cheaper, and more dependable. The program quietly dropped the Camaro. It is thought that only 2 of the original Camaro Z28 CHP cars are still around today. The rest were taken apart or forgotten about. Ford Aspire from 1994 to 1997. The Ford Aspire was one of the cheapest cars in the US in the early 1990s. with a starting price of about $8,000. It was small, used little gas, and was easy to drive in crowded city areas. A few small towns in the United States decided to use the Aspire for police work, which was surprising. These Aspires weren't well known as official patrol cars, but they did have light bars, radios, and even sirens. The reason was simple: cuts to the budget. The Aspire was only about 2,000 pounds and had a 1.3 L four-cylinder engine. It could get up to 38 miles per gallon, but that was pretty much all it did well. It took more than 14 seconds to go from 0 to 60 mph with only 63 horsepower. It couldn't catch anyone, was too small to hold both prisoners and equipment, and didn't protect against crashes very well. A lot of officers called it a toy car as a joke. The Ford Aspire may have been fine for college students, but when it was painted in police colors, it looked like a joke. It is a warning about how making too many sacrifices to save money can have serious consequences. Chevrolet Celebrity from 1984 to 1986. The Chevrolet Celebrity was part of General Motors' body strategy, which let them make a lot of front-wheel drive sedans that looked and worked almost the same across Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and Buick. People thought the Celebrity was one of the most forgettable cars of the 1980s because it was boxy and didn't have any personality. But when Chevrolet stopped making the rear-wheel drive Malibu in 1983, they needed a cheaper option for police departments. This led to the 1984 release of the Celebrity Police Package. The car had a 2.8 L V6 engine with only 112 horsepower and a carburetor setup. It didn't have turbocharging or fuel injection. The Celebrity was better for patrolling parking lots than for high-speed chases because it didn't have much power. Weirdly, the speedometer went up to 120 miles per meter. Even though there were no performance upgrades to make it go that fast, there is no proof that the car could safely reach that number, if at all. Chevrolet stopped making the police package in 1986, just 2 years after it came out, in 1977 to 1983. The Renault car was a small, light, and cheap French hatchback that was sold in the US under the name Renault 5. The LAR was made for students and people who live in cities. It had a 1.3 L engine that made 60 horsepower and weighed about 1,800 pounds. But strangely, some very small towns in the US used it as a police car. Alquit, Maine, and Lona, Washington are two great examples. Because their populations were under 1,500, they only needed a few cars to patrol the quiet, narrow streets. The LAR, on the other hand, seemed like the best choice because it was cheap, easy to move, and got good gas mileage. But the problems were just as clear. The small size made the inside cramped, which made it hard to carry detainees. The engine was too weak to respond quickly or patrol long distances. Its basic suspension and brakes weren't good for police work either. Renault left the US market in 1983, which ended the LAR's short-lived service from 1991 to 1996. The Saturn SL was a car line that was meant to be completely different from the rest of General Motors cars when the company launched the Saturn brand in the early 1990s. The Saturn SL was the top-of-the-line sedan. It had dent-resistant polymer body panels that wouldn't rust, was light, and got good gas mileage. A few small police departments in the Midwest and Northeast US tried using the Saturn SL for patrol duty in cities. On paper, the SL looked like a good deal because it was cheap, didn't need much maintenance, and had a smooth ride. But using it in the real world showed that it wasn't true. The 1.9 L four-cylinder engine only made 85 to 100 horsepower, which is not enough for quick responses or chases. The light body made it hard to keep the car stable at high speeds, and the cabin was too small to hold all the gear or prisoners that were needed. Even worse, the polymer panels didn't rust, but they broke easily in crashes. Independent crash tests showed that the SL didn't do a good job of protecting its passengers. Dodge Street Regis from 1979 to 1981. Chrysler tried to make its full-size cars smaller in the late 1970s when fuel prices were rising, by turning the old B-body platform into the Dodge St. Regis. But even with this work, the St. Regis was still 220 inches long, just 1 inch shorter than the Cadillac Fleetwood, and it weighed almost 4,000 pounds. Police departments and fleet services got about 30% of all St. Regis production. It had a 3-speed automatic transmission and V8 engine options that ranged from 318 to 360 or 400 cubic inches. It looked like a good police cruiser on paper. In real life, it was a letdown. The car got terrible gas mileage, especially when driving in the city. People often took off features like clear plastic headlamp covers because they were too fragile and hard to fix. Because it was so big, it was slow to respond and hard to move around in small spaces. Even worse, departments were even more frustrated by poor construction and unreliable electrical systems. The St. Regis looked great though, it just couldn't compete with Ford and Chevrolet's smaller, more efficient models. Dodge stopped making the St. Regis after only 3 years in 1981. The Suzuki Swift GT was one of the most fun small hatchbacks of the early 1990s. It had a 1.3L 4-cylinder engine with dual overhead cams and up to 100 horsepower. It weighed only about 1/800 pounds and could go from 0 to 60 mph in less than 9 seconds. Some small towns and school districts in the U.S. tried using the Swift GT for light patrol duties, school zone traffic control, and neighborhood watch roles because it was surprisingly good and cheap. But the Swift GT quickly showed its flaws as a serious police car. It was almost impossible to carry equipment or move a detainee because the body was so small and the inside was so cramped. There were no airbags, no anti-lock brakes, and it didn't protect you well in a crash. The car was unstable at high speeds because the chassis was light, and it could easily get damaged on rough ground because it didn't have much ground clearance. The Swift GT was fast, but it wasn't built to handle real police work. Hyundai Excel from 1990 to 1994. The price was the best thing about the second-generation Excel that Hyundai came out with in the early 1990s. The Excel was one of the cheapest new cars on the market, with prices starting at just over $6,500. A few small-town and rural police departments were interested in that price tag. Some people tried to use the Excel for light-duty jobs like patrolling the neighborhood, helping with events, or moving people around inside the company. It had some clear advantages on paper, like a curb weight of about 2,100 pounds, a fuel economy of about 35 miles per gallon, and low maintenance costs. But the problems quickly became clear. The Excel's 1.5L 4-cylinder engine only produced about 81 horsepower, so it couldn't speed up when it needed to. Its weak suspension, thin frame, and lack of crash safety made it a bad choice for any situation where there was a chance of danger or impact. A lot of units broke down early because the parts weren't always good. Some officers even remembered how a light tap on the door in a parking lot could dent the body panels. Oldsmobile Achiever SCX W41, 1992-1993. In the early 1990s, Maine General Motors tried to give the Oldsmobile brand a new lease on life. The Achiever SCX W41 was the result. It was based on the Cutlass Kalala platform and had a 2.3L Quad 4 engine that could make up to 190 horsepower, a 5-speed manual transmission, and a sport-tuned suspension. It was the most powerful front-wheel drive car made in the U.S. at the time. Some police departments in the Midwest got SCX W41 units through promotions at local dealerships or public relations displays. The car's sporty look and impressive specs made it a possible rival to the Ford Mustang in high-speed chases. But what happened was not what they had hoped for. The stiff suspension and low ground clearance made it not good for rough roads or heavy use. The Quad 4 engine was powerful, but it often overheated, leaked oil, and cost a lot to keep up. More importantly, the cramped interior and weak body did not meet the practical or safety needs of police. The Achiever SCXW41 only briefly appeared in a few fleets before disappearing without a trace. Now it is a collector's item instead of a police car. 1900 Dual Fiat Panda 4x4 Polizia. The Fiat Panda 4R4 was made from 1983 to 2003 and was one of the smallest civilian vehicles with all-wheel drive that was ever used by law enforcement. The Panda 4R4 was great for driving on narrow, slippery roads in Italy's mountains because it was less than 140 inches long and weighed only 1/800 pounds. For almost 20 years, Italian police, especially mountain patrol units and officers in small towns, used the Panda 4R4 as their main vehicle. It had a 4-cylinder engine that could be between 1.0 and 1.1 liters and made about 50 to 55 horsepower. It also had an all-wheel drive system that was made by the UK. The Panda 4R4 worked well in some situations, but it was not good for high-speed chases or transporting prisoners. It couldn't fit 2 fully equipped officers and their gear because it only went about 80 mph, had basic brakes, and had a small cabin. The Panda 4R4 was still loved and used until the early 2000s because it was reliable and could drive in snow and mud. Not all police cars are strong and dependable. As you can see, a lot of the cars on this list were made because people had too little money, had the wrong expectations, or just failed experiments. These cars show that just putting a badge and flashing lights on a car doesn't make it a good police tool. They range from weak hatchbacks to impractical sports coups. But these mistakes make the history of police cars even more interesting and memorable. They are lessons that have cost time, money, and sometimes even safety. Have you ever seen any of these cars in person? Or maybe you've driven a strange model that was once used for police work? Please leave a comment to let us know, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to get more stories about the strangest cars in history. Cars in history. Cars in history.